Good afternoon and welcome back. You're watching the Midday Report and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. We are only a day away from the fourth anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As this solemn date looms, ruthless attacks on Ukraine continue. A barrage of drones and an Iskander-M missile targeted civilian and energy infrastructure earlier this morning. For more on the latest, let's go live to our correspondent in Kyiv, Katerji. Hello, Oz. So give us the latest from the capital as it prepares for the fourth anniversary of that conflict that continues to bring more damage and claims more lives. What happened over the last 24 hours?
Good afternoon, Claudia. Well, the eve of the full-scale invasion anniversary tomorrow, Russia launched 126 drones and one Iskander-M ballistic missile into Ukrainian territory, attacking across Ukraine. 4 people killed, 26 injured, 2 of those killed in Odesa when Russia once again targeted energy infrastructure in the southern Ukrainian port city. 2 people killed in Zaporizhia following those attacks. President Zelensky speaking to the BBC before the invasion anniversary, saying that Russia is not interested in peace. Despite these peace talks going ahead, Russia's continued to target Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure, causing large amounts of death and destruction across the country. Now, Ukraine, for its part, also launched an attack on Russia overnight, with an attack reported on a pipeline pumping station in Tatarstan. So the Ukrainian campaign of striking Russian oil infrastructure continues. So while these two sides are supposed to be negotiating in these trilateral talks between the United States, Ukraine and Russia, both sides are still engaged in attacks. However, the big difference is Russia keeps striking Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, and Ukraine keeps targeting the oil revenue facilities that are providing so much of Russia's revenue for its war machine, Claudia.
So much, Oz. That was Katerji reporting live from Kyiv. And while attacks on Ukraine continue, the Speaker of the Polish Parliament, Włodzimierz Czarzasty, is on an official visit to the capital ahead of the upcoming anniversary. The official addressed the Ukrainian Parliament earlier today, and to learn more on what was the message from the second most important official in Poland, let's now connect with Don Arleth, who has the details. Hello, Don. So what was the message of support, and how is Poland going to support Ukraine further, especially when it comes to EU accession?
Yes, hello, Claudia. So, yes, the Polish Speaker of Parliament has come here to Kyiv, and actually the two countries signed a bilateral agreement that Poland will support in every way possible Ukraine's accession to the EU. Now, we all remember, or some of us remember, depending on our age, exactly how difficult it was, that accession process for Poland. And Poland has already gone through all those steps. We've heard talk of expedited entry, or maybe even membership light status for Ukraine beginning as early as next year. However, that wasn't the main topic of the meeting. Of course, we saw the two speakers of both parliaments in the Verkhovna Rada here. And really, it was just a very big gesture of support for as I mentioned, Ukraine's accession to the European Union. Włodzimierz Czarzasty said that there's no free Ukraine without a free Poland, and vice versa. Now, there's also a business agreement that's set to take place, I believe, later on this evening, to try and get the foot in the door for Polish businesses. We all know that the reconstruction of Ukraine is going to be worth hundreds of billions of euros, and Poland definitely wants a piece of that pie. It's something that bilateral ties have been discussed for ever since the beginning of this full-scale invasion, and the destruction has been unleashed by the Russian forces here in the country. So those are the signs of togetherness, of friendship, Of course, the speaker, Włodzimierz Czarzasty, will also be here for the big anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that is coming up tomorrow. Claudia, back to you.
Thank you so much, Don. That was Don Arlith, also reporting live from Kyiv. And just a word to you, our team is there on the ground. Oz Katerji, Don Arlith and Alex Kadie are going to be reporting more as the anniversary unfolds tomorrow, so remember to tune in to TVP World. Let's continue. While Speaker Czarzasty focused on Ukraine's EU accession, the EU's foreign ministers are gathering in Brussels to discuss a range of issues, including ongoing support for Kyiv, which has once again faced resistance from Hungary. Our correspondent Zuzanna Jurek is in Brussels and brings us more.
Hungary has once again moved to weaken European Union's support for Ukraine. Now, over the weekend, we've heard from Hungarian officials saying that they will move to veto both the 90 billion euros loan previously made available for Ukraine, both for civilian as well as military purposes, as well as the 20th package of sanction, which Kaja Kallas, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, was seeking to push during the Foreign Affairs Council taking place on Monday. Now, arriving at the Foreign Affairs Council this morning, we've heard from European officials, including the German foreign minister as well as the Polish foreign minister, who have both stated that the move by Hungary comes as little surprise, yet it is bizarre in nature considering Hungary's historical experiences with Russia itself.
I am surprised by Hungary's position. We will discuss this with our colleagues from Budapest. I do not believe it is right for Hungary to betray its own struggle for freedom and European sovereignty. That is why we will once again approach the Hungarians with our arguments, both in Budapest and, of course, here in Brussels, to ask them to reconsider their position.
The thing that shocks me fundamentally is that while Ukraine is defending itself against the might of the Russian army, Hungarians used to understand what it's like. You know, Budapest was invaded, in fact twice in the 20th century, but once by the Red Army. I would have expected a much greater feeling of solidarity from Hungary for Ukraine. And instead, with the help of state propaganda and private but media controlled by the government, the ruling party managed to create a climate of hostility towards the victim of aggression, and now is trying to exploit that in the general election. It's quite shocking.
Now, although Hungary has a long-standing tradition of vetoing and blocking any initiatives when it comes to supporting Ukraine on a European Union level, the timing of this final bloc, this latest bloc, isn't coincidental. We know that the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, is facing domestic issues of his own, as he is facing towards a next parliamentary election scheduled to take place in April of this year, whereby the opposition Tisza party is substantially leading in the polls. From Brussels for TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Meanwhile, the Russian embassy in Seoul continues to display its "Victory will be ours" banner, despite repeated requests to take it down by the South Korean Foreign Ministry. Our correspondent Gabriela Fesnak brings us the details.
A 15-meter-long banner reading "Victory will be ours" towers over the Jongno district of Seoul. The Russian embassy was repeatedly asked to take it down, but to no avail. Korean Foreign Ministry released a statement in which it called Russia out for its invasion of Ukraine and asked for the banner to be removed.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine constitutes an illegal act. Military cooperation between North Korea and Russia is a clear violation of the UN Charter and UN Security Council resolutions, posing a serious threat to South Korea's security and therefore must be halted.
The diplomatic spat comes amid reports that Seoul is considering joining NATO's Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List initiative, a framework to supply US arms to Kyiv.
And now time for more on the EU-US trade movements. European lawmakers want to delay the ratification of a trade deal with the United States struck in August last year. The decision comes on the back of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that challenged the legal basis for President Donald Trump's tariff policy. Jakub Kapiszewski reports.
Just when you thought global trade can't get any more complicated, this happened. Donald Trump announced new tariffs based on a new legal basis after the Supreme Court threw the previous one out of the window. But it's not just a legal problem, it's a real problem for everyone, including Europe.
the question is about these bilateral agreements or bilateral deals, including the one that you have mentioned, the EU-US, but there are many others. And are they still valid? No, that's something that we don't know.
Since Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs in April last year, many parties managed to secure trade deals with the US, including the EU. Seen by some as unfair, the trade deal would reduce the levies on American goods coming into Europe effectively to zero, in exchange for a 15% flat rate on European goods. But with the basis for the old tariffs gone, what's the basis for the deal? The European Commission, which is in charge of the EU trade policy, is already seeking more clarity on this matter. And then there's the question what that means for Poland.
The US is around 3% of Polish exports, but including all the indirect trade through the EU value chains, Polish trade relations with the US generate around 4% of the Polish manufacturing GDP. So part of the economy, and less than 2% of the overall GDP.
If exports to the US shrink by 1/4, that could mean a drop in industrial production in Poland by 1%. It's not much, but given how hard it is for Polish businesses to find new markets lately, every percentage point counts.
Optimistic about a future deal with the states, but unwilling to unilaterally accept the U.S. demands. That's the stance of officials from the Islamic Republic of Iran ahead of the third round of talks scheduled between Washington and Tehran later this week. As the same line between a potential conflict or a deal is thinner than ever, here's more on the possible scenarios that could play out.
Ahead of the third round of talks between Tehran and Washington later this week, Iran's foreign minister indicated that he was optimistic about striking a deal, the elements of which are in the works.
We are still working on that, and we are trying to make it something which consists of elements which can accommodate both sides' concerns and interests. And we are working on those elements. And I believe that when we meet, probably this Thursday in Geneva again, we can work on those elements and prepare a good text and come to a fast deal. This is my understanding. I see it quite possible.
But the foreign minister's spokesperson warned that any negotiation whose aim is to force Iran to unilaterally accept the U.S. demands is bound to fail. The U.S. suspects that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, an allegation denied by Iran. Consequently, Washington is pushing Tehran to make a deal limiting its nuclear program. To arrive at this goal, Donald Trump is reportedly open to launching a preemptive strike in the coming days, and possibly a major attack in the next months if diplomacy and a preliminary attack fail to secure concessions.
We're either going to get a deal or it's going to be unfortunate for them.
On Monday, EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas indicated that the situation in Iran is intense. She pointed out that the issue extends beyond the nuclear program and includes Tehran's ballistic missile efforts and beyond.
It is true that Iran is at its weakest point that they have been. We should be really using this time to find a diplomatic solution.
Over the weekend, Iran saw major anti-government protests, with students commemorating people killed in Tehran's January crackdown. The crowds chanted "Death to the dictator," referring to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Previously, Trump even supported the protesters, alleging that, quote, help is on the way. But the situation rings alarm bells beyond Iran.
And the real concern, on the other hand, is among Iran's immediate neighbors, especially in the Middle East, the Persian Gulf. There is the potential for a wider disruption, a new wave of instability.
On Friday, a U.S. aircraft carrier was seen entering the Mediterranean as part of a massive military buildup in the Middle East ordered by Trump. The U.S. is said to be considering the approaching talks in Geneva as the final attempt to avoid an armed clash with Iran. Kaja Kallas stressed that another war in the region is not needed.
And now joining me in the studio for a summary of the Polish wins at the 2026 Winter Olympics, which just came to a close, is our TVP World sports correspondent John Carter. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And yes, it was the closing ceremony of the 2026 Games on Sunday, and it was a spectacular affair. And as we know, Poland finished the Games with 4 medals, keeping up their record of a medal, at least a medal, in each of the games since the turn of the century. In fact, it was Poland's third most successful Olympics in history. And cumulatively, across 2018 and 2022, they managed 3 medals. So when we compare that, it certainly suggests that Polish winter sport is on an upward trajectory. But let's have a closer look as to how true that statement really is. And first place to start is with the star of the show, Kacper Tomaszak. Now, Tomaszak has been a sensation for Poland, picking up 2 silvers and a bronze. And the 19-year-old, I think we should bear in mind, has never even had got a single podium in a World Cup individual event. The guy came from nowhere. Absolutely remarkable in that respect. So, indeed, we should bear in mind that without Tomaszak's presence, the medal table would have a rather gloomy perspective from Poland's point of view. OK, now, moving on, and prior to the Games, Polish fans' focus was on the speed skating. And with that in mind, with a lot of hopes pinned on the speed skating, certainly Władimir Semeruni delivered. He won a silver in the men's 10,000 metres. Damian Jurek did the country proud, unlucky not to pick up a medal, 2 fourth-place finishes. However, perhaps we can feel a little bit disappointed, a tad underwhelmed by the result in the end, given the relative strength of Poland's squad. Now, moving on, and some commentators have suggested in general terms that when we look at Poland as a whole, is a population of 40 million and it's a relatively strong economy, they think Poland should be doing better than just 4 medals. Well, there are a few things I think we need to bear in mind, some kind of natural obstacles for Poland's success. You know, you have to remember that Poland lacks the high-altitude mountain terrain and reliable snowfall compared to the kind of major alpine nations. So, of course, this kind of restricts ability for development and infrastructure. However, that doesn't need to be a complete inhibitor. Of course, Poland could do better and could boost their middle output, and we only have to look to the North Koreans and the Netherlands for that. Mainly flat countries, and they've racked up the medals in these games, in particular in the speed skating. Of course, a kind of discipline where you can just create the infrastructure and you're not relying on nature itself and the outdoor conditions. Now, furthermore, we could also look into the example of Klaudia Adamek. Could be an interesting approach in the future for Poland and the authorities and the Polish athletes. Adamek, she transferred across. She was a sprinter, competed at the 2021 Summer Olympics, and she competed for Poland in the bobsleigh in these 2026 games. And of course, her sprint power, her fast start really lends itself to the bobsleigh, which is heavily reliant on that explosive beginning. So that might be something to bear in mind in the future as a future avenue for a greater success. Now, it's time to look at the medal table one last time. And here's how things look. As we can see, as expected, Norwegians comfortably out on top, 41 medals in total. They are the greatest nation in Winter Olympic history, and they continue that proud tradition. United States, well, they cemented their second place, winning the gold medal match in the ice hockey over Canada on Sunday. Oh, it says the Netherlands here. Yes, the Netherlands very close with the Italians in third and fourth. And finally, we can see Poland down there in 21st. Now, without a gold medal and in 21st place, it's probably not something to get particularly excited about. But whilst that might not be something to be excited about, it undoubtedly represents progress in winter sport. That's all for me for the time being. Back to Claudia.
Thank you so much. It's always fascinating to look back at the Olympics, and in this case, at the Winter Olympics. This was John Carter, TVP World Sports correspondent. And so this would be all for now. Thank you very much. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. You're watching the Midday Report, but I hope that you're going to join us at 4 p.m. CET for some of the latest news with Alex Sumlinski during World News. We'll see you there.